There is a van sitting in a tow yard right now, probably within 15 miles of wherever you are reading this, with expired plates, a cracked windshield, and a bird's nest where the passenger seat used to be. It has been sitting there for 2 years. The owner stopped paying storage fees 14 months ago, and nobody has come looking for it. That van is not garbage. It is a legal process away from belonging to whoever is bold enough to figure out that process. Thousands of abandoned vehicles get titled and transferred to private citizens every single year in America, and almost nobody outside a small circle of people who live in vans, build out campers, or convert vehicles into homes knows this is even possible. Let's start with the scale of what is just sitting there, because until you see the numbers, none of this feels real. The American Automobile Association estimates that over 40 million vehicles are abandoned in the United States every single year. Not misplaced, not temporarily parked, abandoned, left, walked away from. The reasons vary more than you might expect. Some owners get hit with a repair bill that costs more than the vehicle is worth. A transmission rebuild on an older van can run $3,000 easy, and if the van was worth $2,000 on a good day, the math does not work. So the owner stops answering the mechanic's calls, stops paying the storage fees, and eventually just disappears from the paperwork entirely. Other vehicles get abandoned after an owner dies, and the family either does not know the vehicle exists or cannot agree on who deals with it. Estate paperwork is slow, families are complicated, and a van sitting in a storage unit in Phoenix does not feel urgent when you are grieving in Ohio and the storage bill is $65 a month. So it sits, month after month after month. Some vehicles are abandoned at the end of a road trip gone wrong. Some get left at auto shops during personal crises. Some are pulled over, impounded, and never retrieved because the owner was dealing with something far bigger than a car at that moment in their life. And then there are the ones left on private property. Driveways, vacant lots, the back corners of storage facilities. A 1994 Econoline with 4 flat tires that the previous tenant of a rental property left behind, and the landlord has been staring at for 3 years wondering what to do with it. All of these vehicles share one thing in common. At some point, the law catches up to them. And when it does, the law does something that most Americans have no idea about. It creates a pathway for someone else to own them. Every state in America has an abandoned vehicle statute. Every single one. This is not a loophole that someone discovered on a Reddit thread at 2 a.m, convinced they had cracked some secret code the government forgot to patch. This is intentional legislation that has existed in most states since the 1970s. Written specifically because abandoned vehicles create real, expensive, ongoing problems for real people and real institutions. Think about it from the government's perspective for a second. A vehicle sitting in a municipal impound lot for 14 months is not just an eyesore. It is taking up physical space that costs money to maintain, staff, and insure. Tow yards operate on tight margins and cannot afford to become permanent storage facilities for vehicles nobody is coming back for. Private property owners get county notices about abandoned cars rusting in their driveways. Storage facilities lose revenue on units a vehicle is occupying while a paying customer is on a wait list. Self-storage is a surprisingly ruthless industry when you get behind the curtain of it. The law exists because governments and businesses needed a clean legal mechanism to resolve what happens when a vehicle's owner effectively vanishes from the equation. Someone had to decide what to do with all these orphaned machines, and legislators in state after state decided that the answer was a structured statutory process, not chaos, not first come, first served, a process. Here's how that process works at the basic level. A vehicle is considered legally abandoned after a specific period of inactivity, and that period varies significantly depending on which state you are in. The range across most states runs somewhere between 30 days and 1 year. California triggers the process at 30 days from the time a certified notice goes out to the last registered owner on file. Texas runs on a different timeline. Florida has its own version. Georgia, Arizona, Ohio, all different. Every state wrote its own statute, which means the absolute first step for anyone serious about pursuing this is to find and actually read the specific law for their specific state. And I do mean actually read it, not skim a blog post summary from a website whose most recent article was published in 2014 and still references a DMV office that closed during the Obama administration. Once a vehicle clears that statutory threshold and is formally declared abandoned under state law, a chain of legal events becomes available. The tow yard or storage facility holding the vehicle can file for a possessory lien, which is their legal claim against the vehicle for unpaid storage fees. A private property owner hosting an unwanted vehicle on their land can file an abandoned vehicle report directly with the local DMV. A municipal impound lot can initiate a title transfer process to move the vehicle out of state custody and into someone else's hands. Here's the piece that tends to genuinely surprise people when they first encounter it. In many states, an ordinary private citizen can initiate or participate in parts of this process themselves, not by walking into a tow yard, pointing at a van, and announcing that they would like it now, please. It is more structured and more deliberate than that. There are forms, there are waiting periods, there are notification requirements, but the process is entirely real, entirely legal, and has been successfully completed by thousands of people across the country who went on to convert those vehicles into homes, campers, mobile workshops, and full-time residences. And here is the number that tends to make people stop scrolling. In many cases, the total out-of-pocket cost to legally acquire a vehicle through this process runs somewhere between $0 and a few $100s. If you have spent any time recently looking at even the cheapest functional cargo vans on Facebook Marketplace, you already understand exactly why that number matters as much as it does. Now, where are these vans actually located, and how do you find them before someone else does or before they get crushed for scrap? The first place most people think of is a tow yard, and they are not wrong. But the process of acquiring a vehicle from a tow yard is more complicated than simply walking in and asking. Tow yards are businesses. They are holding vehicles on behalf of other parties, sometimes municipalities, sometimes private property owners, and they are navigating their own legal obligations around notification and lien processes. That said, tow yards regularly end up in possession of vehicles that nobody claims and nobody wants, and the staff at a tow yard often knows exactly which ones those are because they have been staring at them for months. A calm, respectful conversation with the manager of a tow yard about whether they have any unclaimed vehicles that are approaching the end of the legal holding period is not a weird thing to do. It is actually the kind of conversation tow yard operators appreciate because an unclaimed vehicle that a private citizen wants to legally acquire and title through proper channels solves a problem for them. They would rather not crush it. Crushing costs money too. Municipal impound lots work similarly. These are the facilities operated by or contracted to local governments where vehicles towed from public streets end up. Most cities hold public auctions for unclaimed impounded vehicles, and those auctions are open to anyone. Some cities post them online, some post flyers at the lot itself, some have email lists you can sign up for. The prices at municipal auctions are often startlingly low, particularly for vehicles that look rough on the outside but have salvageable bones. A van that needs a new windshield and 4 tires and a thorough cleaning is not the same thing as a van with a blown engine. Learn the difference before you start showing up at auctions. Self-storage facilities are the overlooked goldmine in this whole ecosystem. And I say goldmine loosely because what we are really talking about is a locked unit full of someone's forgotten life, which is equal parts useful and melancholy. Storage facilities regularly deal with units whose renters have stopped paying and stopped responding. Most states give facilities the legal authority to auction the contents of those units after a specific abandonment period. Occasionally, those units contain vehicles. Not often, but often enough that storage facility managers are a worthwhile contact for anyone serious about this search. Private property is where some of the most interesting discoveries happen. A vehicle sitting on someone's land that they want gone. Not every landowner knows they have legal options for having it removed or titled over. Some just want it off their property. A person who approaches a private landowner respectfully, offers to take the abandoned vehicle off their hands, and understands the basic paperwork involved can sometimes walk away with a title transfer for nothing more than the cost of a tow. Estate sales and county surplus auctions round out the list. Both regularly include vehicles. Both are underattended. Both can yield exactly the kind of large cargo van that costs $8,000 to $15,000 on the private market for a fraction of that price. Now let's talk about the single most powerful and most underused legal tool in this entire process, the surety bond method. This is the one that tends to stop people mid-scroll when they first encounter it, because it sounds complicated and official and slightly intimidating. It is none of those things once you understand how it works. A surety bond, in the context of a vehicle title, is essentially a financial guarantee. You are telling the state DMV I am claiming ownership of this vehicle and I am putting up a bond to back that claim, meaning if someone comes along with a legitimate competing claim to this vehicle, the bond exists to cover them. The bond protects the state and any potential prior owner from fraud. It is not a payment to the DMV. It is a financial instrument you purchase from a bonding company, and in most states it costs between $100 and $200 for a vehicle valued under $4,000. The surety bond method is specifically useful for vehicles that have no clean title available. Maybe the paperwork was lost, maybe the previous owner died and the title was never transferred, maybe the vehicle changed hands informally a few times and the documentation got messy along the way. A title bond, which is what many states call this product, allows you to take a vehicle with no paperwork and emerge on the other side of the process with a legal DMV-issued title in your name. The states where this process tends to be fastest and most straightforward include Texas, Florida, Georgia, and several others in the South and Southwest. Texas in particular has a reputation in the van life and overlanding community for having one of the more navigable bonded title processes in the country, which is part of why you will find a disproportionate number of van conversion builders based out of Texas. The general steps look like this. You obtain the vehicle, you establish the vehicle's value, usually through a written appraisal or a VIN report. You purchase a title bond for the appropriate amount from a licensed surety company. You submit the bond along with your application to the state DMV, pay the title transfer fee, and wait. In many states, the bonded title is issued within a few weeks and becomes a clean, transferable title after a period of 3 years during which no competing claims appear. That is it. A legal title to a vehicle that had no paperwork for the cost of a bond and a title fee. I will be honest with you. The first time I read through this process, I assumed I was missing something. I read it again. I called a DMV. It really is this. The information exists, it is public, and the reason most people do not know about it is simply that nobody told them. Let me tell you about some of the people who figured this out. A man named Curtis in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, had been living in a tent in a wooded area behind a Dollar General for 7 months when a pastor at a church he occasionally visited mentioned offhandedly that the church had an old Chevrolet Express van sitting in the back lot. The previous youth pastor had driven it for church trips. The registration had lapsed. The church did not have the title because the van had been donated years earlier without proper paperwork. The church board had no idea what to do with it and had been ignoring it for 2 years. Curtis asked if he could have it. The pastor said he would bring it to the board. 3 weeks later, Curtis had a letter on church letterhead releasing any claim the church had to the vehicle, and he had spent $60 on a bonded title process he learned about entirely from a YouTube comment section. He is not too proud to admit that. It was a YouTube comment. 6 months later, the van had a wooden sleeping platform, 200 watts of solar on the roof, and a mailing address at a UPS store in Metairie. Curtis was working again. He has held the same warehouse job for 14 months. A woman named Priya in Phoenix spent 4 months researching Arizona's abandoned vehicle statutes after losing her apartment during a period of medical debt. She identified 3 separate vehicles at a municipal auction in Maricopa County, attended the auction alone on a Tuesday morning when most people were at work, and paid $220 for a high-roof Ford Transit with a blown rear door seal, bald tires, and a smell she later described as aggressively historical. She replaced the tires for $300 by buying used tires from a salvage yard. She resealed the door herself with a kit from an auto parts store. The smell, she said, yielded to 4 boxes of baking soda and 2 weeks of patience. She now lives in that Transit in Tempe and runs a mobile dog grooming business out of the back. She bought a grooming table at an estate sale for $40. I want to be clear that the dog grooming thing was not the plan when she bought the van. Sometimes the plan reveals itself after the van does. Then there is Marcus in Detroit, a 26-year-old who spent 18 months methodically building relationships with 3 different tow yard operators in Wayne County, stopping by every few weeks, asking questions, learning their processes, and waiting. He was not being creepy about it. He was being patient, which is a different thing and a skill more people should develop. On his 7th visit to one particular yard, the manager told him there was a Dodge Sprinter that had been unclaimed for 11 months, the owner was unreachable, and the lien process was almost complete. If Marcus came back in 3 weeks and the owner still had not appeared, the yard would be willing to discuss a private sale of their lien interest for the cost of accrued storage fees. Marcus came back in 3 weeks. He paid $640 in storage fees. He drove a Sprinter home. Not a perfect Sprinter, but a Sprinter. These stories share something that no government program created and no nonprofit funded. They share a person who decided to learn a legal process that most people do not know exists, and who used that knowledge to solve a problem that the conventional system had no affordable solution for. Now I have to tell you what not to do, because there is a version of this story that ends with handcuffs, and it is worth being specific about where that line is. Taking a vehicle that does not belong to you without following the legal process is theft. It does not matter how long it has been sitting there. It does not matter if it looks like nobody wants it. It does not matter if the tires are flat and the registration expired in 2009. If you do not have legal authorization to take that vehicle, moving it is theft. Full stop. People get into serious trouble in this space by making a few specific mistakes. The first is touching a vehicle before the legal abandonment period has elapsed. A vehicle that has been sitting somewhere for 3 weeks is not an abandoned vehicle under almost any state statute. It is a vehicle whose owner might come back tomorrow. Leave it alone. The second mistake is skipping the title process entirely and just driving a vehicle that has no title in your name. This creates a nightmare that compounds over time. You cannot register it. You cannot insure it properly. If you are ever in an accident, the legal and financial exposure is significant. And if you ever want to sell it or transfer it, you have no legal standing to do so. The bonded title process exists precisely to solve the no paperwork problem. Use it. The third mistake is ignoring competing claims. If a prior owner surfaces during the bonding period and can demonstrate legitimate ownership, your bond covers their claim. This is how the system is designed to work. Do not try to hide a vehicle from a legitimate owner. Do not misrepresent the vehicle's history on bonding paperwork. These are federal fraud issues, not parking tickets. The fourth mistake, and this one is more practical than legal, is acquiring a vehicle without verifying the VIN first. Run the VIN through the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System before you spend $1 on a bonding process. A vehicle that has a salvage title, is flagged as stolen, or has an active lien from a financial institution is a different and significantly more complicated situation than a genuinely abandoned vehicle with clean history and lapsed registration. Research first, acquire second, title properly, then build whatever you want to build. There is a bigger picture here that goes beyond individual van builds and the satisfaction of driving home in something you got for almost nothing. The abandoned vehicle statutes that make all of this possible were written by legislators who were solving a different problem than housing. They were solving a clutter problem, a liability problem, a municipal resource problem. They were not thinking about the 40-year-old woman who just lost her apartment and needs somewhere to sleep that is not a tent on a sidewalk. They were not thinking about the veteran who cannot afford first and last month's rent and deposit on a fixed income. They were not thinking about the single father who needs a vehicle to live in while he saves enough to get back into a rental market that has become effectively inaccessible to anyone without 3 months of income in the bank. But here's what keeps happening. People facing exactly those situations are finding these statutes. They are reading them at public libraries on borrowed computer time. They are learning the bonding process from YouTube comments and van life forums and conversations at food pantries. They are doing the legal research that nobody hired them to do and that nobody is teaching them. And they are emerging on the other side of that process with a vehicle title in their hand and a roof over their head. The system did not design this outcome, but the system built the mechanism that makes it possible, and the people who are using it are not exploiting a flaw. They are using a law the way a law is supposed to be used. Quietly, legally, correctly, and with more dignity than a shelter waitlist that stretches out for 4 months. There is something worth sitting with in that contrast. The same country that cannot figure out how to house hundreds of thousands of people sleeping outside tonight already has a legal framework that allows an ordinary citizen to acquire an abandoned vehicle, title it properly, and create their own shelter for a few $100s and a library card's worth of research. The framework exists. The vehicles exist. The people who need them exist. What has been missing until recently is the knowledge that the three things can connect. A man named Curtis in Baton Rouge learned it from a YouTube comment. A woman named Priya in Phoenix learned it by reading state statutes in a coffee shop. A man named Marcus in Detroit learned it by showing up at a tow yard 7 times and asking polite questions. None of them had a government grant. None of them had a nonprofit caseworker guiding them through the process. They had stubbornness and time and the specific kind of determination that only appears when the alternative is sleeping outside. The vans were there the whole time. The law was there the whole time. Somebody just had to be desperate enough or curious enough to put the two things together. If this video opened something up for you, hit subscribe. Every week, I cover stories about the people who are solving impossible problems with the tools everybody else walked past. The video on screen right now goes deeper into one of those tools, and it connects directly to everything you just watched. Click it. I will see you there.